Hi, everybody. I'm David Alzamendi, independent data architect and consultant. And today we're going to be looking at 10 points of improvement for Microsoft Fabric. I'm joining today from a conference, the Enterprise Data World Conference in the US. So I'm joining from the hotel here. So let's see how we go. But let's get started. So Microsoft Fabric, it is a new product. It's been there for only 18 months or so. And today I'm going to share my honest review, basically. Things that I have seen during the implementations, things that I like the product to improve on. We're not going to go into the nitty gritty detail, into maybe the technicalities. I'm going to try to stay strategic, maybe even provide some recommendations on those points of improvement. But I've seen it. I've used the product. I've done implementations. I've tried following the best practices. As an early adopter, I had to run a lot of challenges, learn new things. It's a new platform, even though that many of the capabilities were coming from Azure. I had to learn by myself by trying, and running into mistakes. So let's get started. The first one I guess that I want to touch on, it has to be it has to be this one: data stores within Microsoft Fabric. Uh, we have the data warehouses, we have the lakehouses, we have the databases. Why do we have so many options, right? So having options is a good thing, right? But if this is going to be Microsoft Fabric is meant to be our one-stop shop for data analytics, our platform to go for the upcoming years. Having so many options, it can be confusing, and it is confusing. Every project that I go and implement, it is still confusing. We ideally we like to have just one data store. Why do we have three data stores? I understand three or four, right? So we start considering the real time analytics capabilities. But let's focus on core data warehousing. So we have the data warehouses, we have the lakehouses, and we also have the Fabric databases. Three different stores that you can run your data warehouse capabilities on. Um, Definitely, look, my point of view here is that first of all, we should have one that has all the functionality and capabilities that we need to run data warehousing capabilities. But we have three, and that could be challenging when you're trying to decide what data store to use. And I know I did a live stream, on what to consider to choose the right data store. But even by having guidelines that help you decide what data store to use, I think it could be simpler. Simpler would be a really good thing in this case. So now let's focus on different scenarios, right? So let's talk about Fabric databases. Fabric databases, they take advantage of the Azure SQL DB, and I love it. And I still believe that it's a great data store for small organizations. Small organizations that they don't have terabytes of data, that they might be loading, 100 MB of new data every day. The Fabric databases are still a great fit for the scenario. But we release the warehouses and the lakehouses databases that they've been built to work with large volumes of information. And they use the Delta tables and they use the OpenFile format with a lot of new functionality, but as well with a lot of limitations when you compare with traditional relational database management systems like SQL Server or Oracle. So, why to throw away 40 years of development of SQL Server when we acquired a lot of knowledge, a lot of new functionality was released, and it was working great for many businesses building data warehouses. Why to throw away 40 years of development coming up with the lakehouses that, and the warehouses that they take advantage of other new engines that they haven't been tested for 40 years. I do understand, like having options is a good thing, but ideally, I like to see maybe a lakehouse with a SQL endpoint that allows you to apply edits to your data, and not only a read only a SQL endpoint, and that way we might be able to get rid of the warehouse, right? And reduce the number of options to the bare minimum to make things easier for our implementations and for our customers. On on top of that, so if you consider that that's not going to happen because the reality is right now we have people using the warehouses in production environments, and we have other organizations using the lakehouses in production environments. So it's unlikely at this point in time if there's any path for decommissioning one of those data stores. So uh, moreover, right? So we can talk about the skills. So if you are a data engineer, and you want to push data into a data warehouse environment, you can either use, the lakehouse or the warehouse or the fabric databases. I don't see why, based on the skills, if you know Python or Transact SQL, you're a data engineer, so you'll be able to figure it out. You know the best practices. Whatever you've done in Transact SQL, you'll be able to find a way to do it in Python. So those best practices, you can easily transfer them across the different data stores. So I always advocate, don't don't let your skills decide what data store use for the organizations for the coming years. But maybe that's feedback. If I wanted to envision how we could solve this problem in the future, I guess, look, I'll be clear. I think 90% of the organizations might be fine on using Fabric databases and replicating that information in one lake, right? And the other 10% that you have to work with large volumes of data, you might be fine with using a lakehouse, but I'd like to see the SQL endpoint for the lakehouse to have the options for us to do edits to the data. And that way we can remove the warehouse at all. So we don't need the warehouse at all. Um, what I love about the warehouse, and this is a plus, I think the serverless option. Having the option to query your data without having to run an Apache Spark cluster, that was a huge benefit already in the Synapse Analytics space in Azure, and it is still a huge benefit here in the Fabric environment. So I don't really want to spin up an Apache Spark cluster every time that I want to query 4 or 5 rows, right? So you will go to the SQL endpoint for doing those types of queries. Okay, let's move on. So let's go with the second one. Target audience. Look, at the end of the day, Microsoft Fabric is a tool set. You have tools, you have different components, and you can create different components for different business cases. But at the same time, having so many components within the Microsoft Fabric environment, even though you can disable creation of Fabric components for some specific groups, having so many components can be confusing even for developers, right? So just we had in the past all the Fabric, all the Power BI stack that was, just right, reports, semantic models, data flows, data marts, Power BI dashboards, Power BI apps. So we can go on listing the number of Power BI items, and now we add all the Microsoft Fabric stack. And certainly we have to think of different personas will use different experiences, and within those experiences, they will use different components. And that's, in a nutshell, that idea. I like it a lot. But now there's been things like rebranding many of the Power BI user groups or the Power BI community to be the Fabric community. And that could be confusing because the Power BI community was about empowering business users to get quick insights from the Power BI reporting tool. That was the mission of the Power BI tool, and it's still the mission today, I believe. So for the past 10 years, we built a community that really empowers those business users to get more insights from Power BI reports. And now we added all these other tools, data engineering and data warehousing, real-time analytics, and so many other tools that the Power BI user doesn't have to be aware of, right? And even though knowing that, we have rebranded many of the Power BI community user groups, and many of the Power BI items or artifacts, now they're called Microsoft Fabric. And I think that's definitely affecting the community that we foster and we created and we empowered during the past 10 years. So it's really difficult now to, as a Power BI user, so myself as well. So I might want to learn anything about the lakehouses and the warehouses and the data flow gen 2. But currently, the nature and I guess what I'm seeing is that I might start listening on topics and things that they might be they made me feel that I'm no longer aligned with what I was learning before. If that if that makes sense, Yeah. I don't know if there's a solution for this. I think the idea about the different experiences and having different personas within Microsoft Fabric, I think we really want to keep that message. I think that's a good idea, but certainly could be confusing for an existing Power BI developer or a new business user or a new Power BI developer whose focus only is creating Power BI reports and getting quick insights to have all this noise about Microsoft Fabric items. Something to consider, I guess, as part of your onboarding process, as part of your organization. If you have any power users who are going to are currently creating Power BI reports, and you're also thinking about releasing Microsoft Fabric capabilities, this is something that it might affect their their the roles and responsibilities. So definitely make sure that you consider this as part of change management, that you put this as part of your onboarding process, that you make it part of your learning management system, and you are consistent with Microsoft approach of talking about different personas, different experiences under the same umbrella and of Microsoft Fabric with different tools. The next one that I like to talk about is capacity units. As you know, capacity units is basically like tokens that you use to consume compute power within Microsoft Fabric. So every time that you move data, every time that you query the data, you are querying the reports, or you're applying transformations, you are using your capacity units essentially. Then the challenge that I see about capacity units is that you are given a specific number of those tokens, of those capacity units. And once that you run out of those capacity units, maybe everything stops working. And I don't like that. I don't like the scenario where, for maybe a data orchestration challenge or something happened overnight, that we used all the capacity unit tokens and all the reports stopped working, and now have to go and scale up to be able to solve that problem, right? I don't like the idea of having a specific number of capacity units and some usage restrictions on how I use those tokens. It was better before, right? So when you had an environment with a few, let's say, two servers and four CPUs in those two servers, you had some more flexibility on how to manage those resources. And worst scenarios, in the worst scenarios, maybe some requests they were rejected. They were rejected at the database level, right? But right now, we already seen some customers running into a challenge that that the users start querying the reports within an IAM when they start working, and they don't work because something happened with all the capacity units and they have been used. We have some specific rules that you can define. You can create multiple capacities, and I will talk about that. but I don't really enjoy the idea of being given a specific number of capacity units that I have to use within a period of 10 minutes and 24 hours, even though that I can borrow some capacity units from the future. I don't like that idea at all. I don't know if there is a solution for it. Maybe having a most consistent pay as you go model. I the idea of having the different tiers, I get it. You have an F2 and you get 2 capacity units per second, and with F4 you get 4 capacity units a second. But what if I had an a capacity tier that doesn't ties me up to a specific number of capacity units, even though maybe I have to pay more for the capacity units that I use? Having that consistent pay-as-you-go model, use any number of capacity units whenever I want, whenever I need it, without running into the challenge of of running out of them for everything stopping working. I think it could be a nice enhancement. And you've seen Microsoft actually fully invested on releasing new capability in this case, having an Apache specific model for running Apache Spark jobs as a pay-as-you-go model. You've seen the Copilot capabilities being made available. Just one Copilot capacity across all workspaces. You can do that as well. I think Microsoft is fully invested on overcoming some of these challenges based on our feedback. But this is today, right? We're talking about 2025. So let's move to the next one. So data flows Gen 2. I love the idea of empowering users to apply their transformations and clean the data and applying some business rules and doing that hard work. If you already have people in your organization that are at that level of data maturity, I love the idea. I love the I don't know how many connectors, more than 100 connectors that we can use in the data flow Gen 2. But a huge limitation is the number of capacity units that they use. So they use, even though if you're trying to copy like 5 rows, let's put like a more basic scenario, right? So you try to copy 5 rows from a SQL Server database and you apply a small Power Query transformation in those data flows Gen 2, you will be using an absurd amount of capacity units. And that's something that currently, as today, and I'm sure this is going to change. All the things that I'm talking about today, they're going to change, and hopefully we overcome them. But as today, I don't recommend anybody using data flows Gen 2 as the standard method for doing transformations and importing data into Microsoft Fabric. They are still great for many scenarios, right? So if you're trying to copy some data from a specific connector that is available only in Dataflow Gen 2, or you're trying to copy some reference data that comes from one of those connectors, they still have a room in the implementations that they do. But again, the number of capacity units that Dataflow Gen 2 use is too many, way too many, and we should overcome that as well. Let's move on to focusing on one product. So look, Microsoft is one of the leader companies in the world, right? And they are building the software so organizations can basically provide more value to the society, or increase their sales or reducing cost, or so they give us the software that we can use to run our operations and our business and run our data analytics environments. But what happens? So you've seen the changes during the past few years. So before the cloud, and we're not talking that far, right? So before 2000, let's say 2012 or whatever, we were always talking about SQL Server, right? But SQL Server integration services, reporting services, analysis services, which is still at the core engine of Power BI. But so we had all the amazing run from DTS packages back in 2000 Then SSIS being released in 2005. It really will run up to, I think, I would say 2016 for most organizations before the big adoption of the cloud. So almost 11 years of data analytics capabilities being released for SQL Server. Then what happened? Then we went to the cloud, right? And many organizations started to move to the cloud. And as part of the cloud, we started to see as well new tools. So we've seen the data factory. We've seen the managed environments for SQL Server, Azure SQL, Azure Managed Instance. We've seen a huge adoption of those products. So people were able to refactor their environments into cloud solutions. And this is mainly, I think I've done most of my cloud projects between 2016 up to 2023, basically. And you know why, right? Because then Microsoft Fabric was released. But see, it was around of around 7 years of new enhancements for data analytics into into Azure. You saw the rise of the modern data warehouse, right? With the storage accounts, data lake storage accounts, and the release of Synapse Analytics that was promised to be the one-stop shop of analytics. And I've done a few implementations of Synapse Analytics, and the customers were extremely happy. But then we moved towards the release of Microsoft Fabric. And what it means in this case is that um, if you've been working with Microsoft technologies for quite a while, you know how it works. Basically, now there'll be a lot of focus on developing the capabilities for Microsoft Fabric and less of a focus on releasing new capabilities for the Azure data analytics products, like Data Factory, like the Synapse Analytics. So you've seen as well. So if you've been using Data Factory or Synapse Analytics, you've seen already, even before the release of Microsoft Fabric, that the number of capabilities being released and the number of features being released was decreasing, right? And now, while this is not a challenge, uh, so with this SQL Server, integration services, analysis services, reporting services for a bare minimum of around, let's say, 11, 12 years. Then we moved to the cloud, let's say by 2016, 17, we had 6 or 7 years of the cloud. And now we have Microsoft Fabric. So if you built a data warehouse during the past 10 years, and that data warehouse is still functional, I would suggest you not to move to Fabric. You can still complement your platform with some of the Fabric capabilities, but just let's be aware of the life cycle of data warehouse. It should be longer of a 7 year period, right? As you know, developing a mature data warehouse, it takes a bare minimum of anywhere between 12 to 24 months, put it that way, right? Focusing on driving adoption. Um, and take of that investment as much as you can. You can complement it with some of the Fabric capabilities if you have to. Stay wherever you are. And if you have a business case where you can develop something in Fabric, you might give it a go. But certainly, I didn't enjoy, and mainly for my customers, right? Having to still push them across different products, and the new iteration of the latest nice and nice product within the Microsoft Analytics ecosystem. I didn't enjoy pushing my customers across all the new iterations, but it's something that it is a software. It's a software product, right? It has a life cycle. So it's been released for a reason. I do believe in the vision. I believe in the vision of Microsoft Fabric and what the platform is achieving and all the potential that we can see in the future. But it's something to consider, I guess, right? So all the investment now is going to go against Microsoft Fabric. Let's move to the next one. Yes, let me get my phone. Just make sure that you can hear me and I don't have any messages Somebody tells me that you guys you cannot hear me. Okay. So the next one will be actually. Let me see. Make sure I'm live. Okay. Yeah. So the next one will be one link. Let's talk about one link. The I guess what I don't like about this is the sales pitch. The sales pitch is what I don't like, right? Because it was promised to us as you will have the data in one place, and that way you will avoid duplication of the data within the one lake ecosystem. You'll be able to overcome the challenge, of duplicating the data into the storage account and then in your data warehouse and then maybe in the reporting layer, right? So it was promised to us that one lake was going to overcome those challenges. I don't like the sales pitch because at the end of the day, one lake is just kind of a virtualization layer. It's just a logical layer, right? It is all what it is. It's like a logical layer, and your data will be physically stored in different places. And you can certainly see that with some of the Microsoft Fabric products. When you look at the Fabric SQL databases, right? It is in one lake, but you have to kind of replicate the data within one lake. So that means that within the Fabric databases, as well as the event house databases, there is an option that you have to go and enable the replication for one lake. And this shows you as well that your data is still actually being duplicated behind the scenes, because the event house or the Azure, the Fabric database, they have their own data store, right? And once that you tick that checkbox, that information is being duplicated within one lake. And you can see it as well. You can see some, I guess, inconsistencies with the SQL endpoint as part of the lakehouse. As soon as you land that information within the lakehouse, one lake storage, you put the information there. In many cases, the warehouse SQL endpoint is still not synchronized, and the information that the SQL endpoint is showing might be old. Not the latest row that you have inserted, so won't be synchronized. So there's a few things in one lake, a little bit of a room of improvement. Definitely, at the beginning, I thought that the one lake idea was great. We don't want to duplicate data, but at the end of the day, you have to remember one lake is just a logical storage. So physically, your information is going to be still duplicated behind the scenes. Next up, the number of Microsoft Fabric capacities. Well, for most organizations, you are going to need more than one Microsoft Fabric capacity. Right? So this is what it's going to give you your compute power, your capacity units to use. So put it this way, right? So if the Microsoft Fabric capacity is what gives you the compute power to execute your workloads, it is like a VM. So you are given a VM with a specific number of tokens that you can use to run your workloads. And you don't want to put all your workloads into a VM, right? So you won't put all the reports and all the transformations and all the data orchestration and all the machine learning models to run within a VM, because they need different type of resources, and in some cases they need the same resources, and you don't want those workloads to compete for resources within the same VM, because they're going to be affecting each other, right? So that means that if I'm applying transformations to 500 gigabytes of information, I don't really want to affect the reporting experience to my users. So I don't want to penalize my users with running data transformations. Therefore, you need more than one VM. You need more than one Microsoft Fabric capacity. And this is the first scenario, right? So that means that you will need different Fabric capacities, ideally running different workloads across your Microsoft Fabric environment. And on top of that, add the level of complexity that you need more than one environment in most cases. So if you are a large organization, You will have a development environment, test environment, potentially a user acceptance environment, and you will have a production environment. So therefore, you cannot put all the different environments workloads running as part of the same Microsoft Fabric capacities, right? So you will need Fabric capacities is dedicated for your production workloads, so that can run smooth without affecting the user experience. And you will need Fabric capacities for running your development workloads, whatever those workloads are. So that means that at the end of the day, if you stick to the best practices within Microsoft Fabric, you are going to end up with a lot of Microsoft Fabric capacities. Um, and I guess that's fine. That makes sense. But what if you don't use the Fabric capacity units from one capacity and you want to use them in a different Fabric capacity? So you cannot do that currently. So you are not able to basically borrow Fabric capacity units from a different Fabric capacity. Even though you could consider, that if you apply kind of a reserve capacities across all your instances on Microsoft Fabric, you might be able to replicate a scenario like that one. But the reality right now is that if you have multiple Fabric capacities running different workloads, and then you have multiple Fabric capacities for different environments, you cannot borrow capacity units that you are not using in other Microsoft Fabric capacities, which becomes a little bit more challenging for us to manage and to optimize workloads. And and on top of that, what I like to see is that some of those nice perks that we get as part of the F64, like I'll give you an example. So as part of using Fabric Capacity F64, you get unlimited number of viewers of Power BI report, right? So I like to see that based on the assumption that we need multiple Fabric capacities, I like to see that requirement being lower, maybe being available in an F16 or F32 or maybe in all tiers, right? At the end of the day, if what we're paying for is capacity units, why not to make that perk available in all the Microsoft Fabric capacities? Another example is that you can embed a Power BI report as an independent software vendor. Any tier of Microsoft Fabric capacity, build an application, embed the reports there, and everybody can consume those reports. I don't see why some of those perks that are only available in F64, especially considering that most organizations they will have to pay for multiple Microsoft Fabric capacities. But I also expect this to change because you've seen it as well already. We've seen it as well, like data agents available in all tiers, Copilot capabilities available in all tiers. So I think we can expect that to change near in the future. Um, the next one will be Medallion Architecture. So this is great. Look, I've been doing data warehousing for since the beginning of my career. Luckily, I enjoy it. I love it. Um, I keep doing the same for the past 15 years. I just help organizations, integrate information from multiple systems into a centralized repository, doing the data cleansing, applying the business rules, and serving that information to multiple departments, specific departments, business users. So I think adding more complexity to how we do things as part of data warehousing, it was not needed. So I really I I do understand, that some people might be familiar with explaining the medallion architecture to the business, but what we're doing behind the scenes is still the same. It's the same approach that us as data practitioners we've been following during the past uh, 40 or 50 years, which is moving information from different systems, centralize that information, apply business rules, create data models, serve that information to the business, right? So it's still the same. So call it medallion architecture, call it modern data warehouse, call it two-tier data warehouse, three-tier data warehouse. We're still doing the same. So the adding one more way of explaining things as part of the Medallion architecture, while I respect it, I understand it, I don't know why there's been this big push by Microsoft on leveraging the Medallion architecture with what's happening behind the scenes. Like we keep doing the same. So now we have to educate um, our users on what the Medallion architecture is, maybe, right? Or maybe we don't have to. I don't believe it's so much of a problem for a data practitioner because we understand the concepts. It's not difficult to master what it does because it's basically the same, but it's become really challenging, right? So having to go to the business now and maybe explain what the Medallion architecture um, is definitely another challenge that I personally believe we didn't need that at this point in time as part of a Microsoft Park. Um, okay, alerts. That's the next one. We have only two more to go actually. In regards to alerts, look, I'm a user and I love the cloud environment. I love what Azure give us as part of the alerts and monitoring. We don't have those capabilities as part of Microsoft Fabric. Yeah, sure. We can go and define, alerts for when we're running out of capacity and over usage of capacity. If you do that as part of, you can define that as part of the admin settings of a capacity. But and you can also go to Data Factory, I guess, and define add an activity that sends an email when something fails. But everything is so much easier in the Azure side, right? In Azure, we have so many more alerts. So I like to see those alerts as part of the Microsoft Fabric item within the Azure ecosystem. I'll give you examples. So before, when you used to create, as an example, a data factory in the Azure ecosystem, you were able to go and define alerts for when a pipeline fails, when a task fails, and you had the action groups, and you could add also remediations with the Azure Logic Apps. I like to see that capability being enabled within the Azure side. I don't believe that we have to kind of reinvent the wheel within the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. I'm sure we all, behind the scenes, we have all the meters, we have all the information that we need to enable some alerts as part of the Azure ecosystem. Right now, we're definitely lacking alerts from as a starting point. We're lacking alerts everywhere, and we have to go and kind of build out our own alerting systems within the Microsoft Fabric stack. It'll be so much easier if they just surface some of those meters as part of the Azure ecosystem. Um, and the last one for today, it'll be actually about code version control. Um, and this will be different actually. I really enjoy having code version control capabilities as part of Microsoft Fabric, independently of some of the current limitations, because those minor limitations will be overcome in the upcoming years. But having code version control certainly has opened a lot of opportunities to stay being a mature organization in regards to managing data products, or to jumping on board and being able to start the journey in code version control if you haven't done that before. What maybe I don't enjoy about this capability is not having code version control as part of the other Power BI tiers. I like to see code version control being available in all tiers, all licensing as part of the Power BI ecosystem. So I like to see it all because there are still many customers who are taking advantage of their Power BI Pro licenses or premium per user licenses. So we really want to give them that code version control mechanisms as part of their solutions. We don't want them to go to SharePoint, all the school solutions, go to SharePoint, go to OneDrive, more complexity. The functionality is already there. available within Microsoft Fabric. So let's go and it'll be great if we make that functionality available of all the Power BI licensing models. So there were 10 things actually that I believe that Microsoft Fabric could improve. As you can see, I didn't focus on the small things. I believe any technical limitations, the Microsoft is going to overcome those limitations. There's a backlog of features. You can submit your own ideas for improving the product, but at the strategic level, I think if Microsoft Fabric gets to overcome some of these 10 strategic items that I mentioned today, it will be positioned in a great place. And remember, I'm still a big advocate for Microsoft Fabric. I think when it comes to the core functionality of data warehousing capabilities, which is basically moving data, transforming data, and making that data available to our users, I think it excels at that. So don't let any of the limitations that I mentioned today being a showstopper for you to adopt Microsoft Fabric, because I've done many implementations already and it just works, and there is a lot of value for the organizations, and there is a return of investment for it. So just take these 10 considerations of today as just that tips, notes, comments of a data practitioner who has implemented already a few Microsoft Fabric solutions. And remember, don't forget to subscribe. Stay in touch. Did I miss anything? Do you have any comments? Is there any other limitation that you're thinking about that I should have included as part of this top 10? Put it in the comments, and looking forward to catching up with you next time. Stay tuned.